This video is going to give you some very clear examples of English allomorphs. You should already have watched the ling space and the other video about allomorphy, so I will give first a brief review about that concept. We talked in the phonology unit about how phonemes can be realized through different allophones, and those allophones are different phonetic articulations of the same phoneme. Much of allophonic variation is predictable, and we know when one allophone is going to occur versus another based on the phonetic context of the phoneme. One example of that was that English nasalization rule, where vowels become nasalized before nasal consonants. Well, this is also true for the expression of morphemes. When we're talking about morphemes, we talk about allomorphs. And these are phonologically different realizations of the unit of meaning of the morpheme, which are predictable sometimes, not always, but just like with allophones, which are often predictable depending on the phonetic properties of the root, stem, or word that the morpheme is attaching to. I'm going to give two examples in this video of English allomorphy and walk you through identifying what the rules are that predict when one allomorph occurs versus the other. And the two examples we're going to use both have to do with inflectional morphemes, the plural S and the past tense, what we call ED marker. As we'll see, you don't actually pronounce ED, right? Of course, you also don't say S. But these are the two inflectional morphemes, suffixes, that we are going to be giving examples from. And just before I do that, in not the ling space video, but the other video, she gave you a very nice example of an allomorph. We typically think of a versus an as two separate words, but really they're the same morpheme, but with two or actually three at least realizations. So actually just for what we write as this, the A, the letter A, that can be realized sometimes as a dog, but other times it's realized as the wedge or maybe the schwa if it's unstressed. So a dog, right? A dog, a dog. That variation is not as clear-cut in terms of the rule that governs it, but both of these variants are different from this one, an, right? And the difference between these two is highly regular and predictable. So again, these expressions mean exactly the same thing. They're allomorphs. They're two different phonological realizations of the same unit of meaning. And not only are they two different phonological realizations of a similar meaning or a related meaning, but they mean exactly the same thing, and they're used in exactly the same grammatical contexts. But one occurs in a phonetic environment that the other does not. So take a second and think if you can remember from that video, or just thinking here, the rule. You might have learned explicitly a rule about this in school elsewhere. What is the rule that predicts when you get the a or a allomorph versus the an allomorph? To help you out, here are some words that we would tend to say, and this is in standard English, I should point out. There is some dialect variation here, actually. But these are the words that we would tend to say after a or a versus an. A dog, a cat, a factory, a lottery versus an item, an organization, an emblem, an ogre. What do you notice about all of the words in the second set versus all of the words in the first set that follow the indefinite article? Take a pause and see if you can figure out what the rule is here. Okay, this problem is actually pretty easy. We see that the next word in all of these cases after a begins with a consonant, whereas the next word in all of these cases after an begins with a vowel. So essentially we have one morpheme. It has at least these two different allomorphs. The an allomorph with the nasal inserted occurs before a vowel, and the a allomorph without the nasal inserted occurs before a consonant. Okay, that's an example of allomorphy. So this is really, allomorphy is one of the things that helps us realize too that, we're talking about phonology and morphology as two different levels of linguistic structure, but they're highly related and intersect in various ways. Okay, so let's talk about the English plural S allomorph. I'm going to give you this list of words. These are all nouns, and these all have the plural S on them. I want you to take a minute and say each of these words aloud and transcribe each word phonemically into IPA. So this is a moment to practice your transcriptions, and also you'll hopefully start to notice a pattern in terms of how the expression of this plural morpheme is different across these words. So take a pause, do those transcriptions. And these are what my transcriptions look like. What do you notice? So we say that all of these have a plural S morpheme on them, but really we have endings that are different across several of these words. So tables, classes, students, jeers, words, crashes, kicks, wishes, plays. And one of the differences you should be noticing here or start to be thinking about is voicing. So some of these are voiced and some of these are voiceless. I've put the voiced in red, z, 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 and the voiceless in green, s, s. And additionally, there's a third allomorph we see where a vowel is actually added, right? You don't say class, and you don't say crash, and you don't say whiz. You actually insert a vowel there that you don't get in these other cases. So is. So that gives us 3 allomorphs for this one morpheme, z, s, and is. How do we know what the rule is that predicts when one allomorph occurs versus another? Well, we know that it has to do with the phonetic environment of the morpheme, and especially because it's a phonological property that's different between all of these. Voicing, well, we might think it has something to do with the voicing status of the sounds that surround the morpheme itself. So what I've done here is taken each instance of each allomorph, and I've written down what is the phoneme that immediately precedes, that is, comes before the allomorph. Okay, so I've taken each one. So this is has an L before it, and that goes in the Z column. This one has an S before it, and that goes over here in the uz column. This one has a T before it, goes over here in the S column, and so on. So this is a list of the environments in which I find the Z allomorph. This is a list of the environments in which I find the S allomorphs, and this is the list of the environments in which I find the uz allomorph. And this is of course not exhaustive. This is just the list coming from this set of words. This is our data, right? And we're trying to figure out patterns in our data. So take a second, another pause, see if you can figure out for each of these 3 allomorphs, what do the phonemes right before the allomorph have in common? So in other words, what is the same about all of these phonemes in the Z column that's different from these phonemes in the S column, that's also different from these phonemes in the uz column? And from that information, you should be able to come up with some kind of rule that predicts when we get each one of these allomorphs. So pause the video, think about this for a minute. Ready? So if you said something about voicing, you are on the right track. What all of these sounds have in common, they're voiced, right? Vowels are voiced. Stop consonant is voiced, the D, and these approximants, liquids, are voiced. T and K, on the other hand, are voiceless. And over here we have a kind of unified class of sounds that we call sibilants. And they talk in your book about sibilants. It's just a way of talking about this specific set of fricatives that make a very high-pitched sort of hissing noise, whether they're voiced or voiceless. So s, sh, z. And if you think about a word, what is the voiced counterpart of this sound? Sh. The voiced counterpart is zh. We didn't have an example of zh up here in our words, but if you think of a word that ends in zh, you will discover that it also has this z allomorph. So garage, garages, right? So this is the rule. Anytime you have this plural S morpheme, you're going to get a voiced z after a voiced consonant that's not a sibilant. You're going to get a voiceless s after a voiceless consonant that's not a sibilant. And you're going to get a z extra syllable there with a whole extra vowel after a sibilant. And of course, I think I forgot to say just now, it's not just consonants over here that cause the voicing of the z, also vowels, because all vowels are voiced, right? So after any voiced sound that's not a sibilant, you get z. After any voiceless sound, you get s, and after a sibilant, you get uz. That's the rule, okay? Let's look at a second example. We're going to do the exact same thing with the past tense, what we say ed allomorph. So I have another list of words here. Kicked, righted, wagged, willed, plotted, hissed, curved, dented, shampooed. Take a pause, say each word aloud, and transcribe it phonemically. And we'll do the same thing looking for patterns. Go! Okay, these are my transcriptions. As before, you should notice 3 different allomorphs, and you'll start to notice have something similar with the last list that we saw. I have a voiceless t here. I have a d with an extra vowel in front of it here, so adding on a whole syllable. I have a d here, a d here, an ud, a t, d, ud, d. So once again, 3 allomorphs, which are distinguished by voicing and also the presence or absence of a vowel. D, t, and ud. Take a second and see if you can now do with what we did with the last exercise. Can you make a list of where each of these allomorphs occurs in terms of its phonetic environment? So can you make a list that has all of the preceding phonemes for d, the preceding phonemes for t, and the preceding phonemes for ud? You should have come up with this, not necessarily in this order, but we have g, l, v, u, k, s, t, d, t. And I ask you again, take a pause, see if you can solve this puzzle. For each of these different allomorphs, for each column, what do the phonemes that come before the allomorph have in common? And so, therefore, what is the rule that predicts when one allomorph occurs versus another? Are you ready for the answer? So once again, it has to do with voicing, and also with the manner of articulation of the final consonant of the word that the morpheme is attaching to. So in this case, we're not dealing with sibilants. We're dealing with a subclass of stops, specifically the alveolar stops. Now this makes sense because the suffix itself involves an alveolar consonant. So we are seeing a pattern here where anytime there's an alveolar stop, whether it's voiced or voiceless, you get the addition of this vowel and an extra syllable there, ud, right? So dented, plodded, and righted. And I'm using the schwa. These often come out feeling like a lax high front vowel I sometimes, so either a schwa or an I would be a reasonable way to transcribe that allomorph phonemically. And then we get the t voiceless after, no surprise, voiceless consonants, right? Kicked, hissed, right? And then we get the voiced stop after voiced sounds, whether those are consonants or, again, vowels, shampooed, because all vowels are voiced in English. So, simple rule again, if the morpheme comes after an alveolar stop, it's going to take on this syllabic property, ud. If it comes after a voiceless sound, it will be voiceless, t. And if it comes after a voiced sound, it will be voiced, d. So this is really another example of that phonological process of assimilation that we talked about when we talked about the nasalization of vowels in the allophones. I want to give you two other cases of allomorphy. I'm not going to tell you the answers. I want you to think about it on your own, and this may show up on an exam. What is the rule that predicts allomorphic variation in the possessive S inflection? So we're looking at another inflection that has to do with, that's a suffix, an inflectional morpheme, this time the possessive S, so also attaches to nouns. Here are some examples. The book is Janie's versus the magazine is Chad's. So what are the allomorphs? This is not all of them, but what are the allomorphs of this? And what is the rule that predicts when one allomorph occurs versus another? And we have also a past participle inflection in English. Now, a lot of verbs in English have an irregular past participle, which takes something like en. It also could take a vowel change, so broken is an example. Eaten is another example. What I'm going to ask you to think about here is actually what regular vowels take, which is this ed inflection suffix. So I have walked before, the cookies have burned. And again, this is not exhaustive of what the allomorphs are, but what are the allomorphs and what are the rules that predict when you get one versus the other? You should be able to figure this out based on the examples that I gave you earlier in this video.